This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. If you're ready, buckle up and enjoy the ride. Let's go question everything. The Consume Her Consumer podcast. I am your host. I'm Anna, aka Mystic Pixie. My last episode, I delved into the golden era of Hollywood and talked about Shirley Temple and the roles of child actors and women in old Hollywood. And then prior to that one, we talked about Alfred Hitchcock. But this week, we're going to do something similar, but I had noted in one of the episodes that I had watched on Netflix, the Ed Gein story. And again, not going to cover Ed Gein, but there was a player in this one that I was fascinated about and decided to do a little digging and try to tie together old Hollywood and film and such. And so that would be Ilsa Koch. She was also known as the Bitch of Buchenwald. So she was one of the Nazi figures in Germany during World War II. She was a very infamous female. And basically, I wanted to talk about her and a little bit of the roles that she had played, and also kind of tie in some of the Nazi regime propaganda and whatnot, and what was going on in the United States at that time in film. And I ended up coming up with some really cool stuff. So I hope you stick around and listen to this episode, and let's dive in. So again, Ilsa Koch. So she was known as the Bitch of Buchenwald, like I said, and she was, her surname was Kohler. Now I did do a little bit of digging because I was like, Kohler, I wonder if that had to do with like the bathroom fixture family. And from what I could find, it doesn't look like there's any sort of relation there. But a little bit about her. She was born in Germany in 1906, and she ended up dying September 1st, 1907, in a prison. She offed herself in the prison in Bavaria, West Germany. She had married Karl Otto Koch. He was a commandant in Buchenwald and later Majdanek. Majdanek concentration camps. A little bit about them. Ilsa was the wife of Karl, like I said, and they ran the Buchenwald concentration camp, which was near Weimar, and that was from 1937 to 1941. As a commandant's wife, Ilsa lived on the campgrounds, and she wielded extreme authority, and she was relentlessly cruel. Survivor testimonies and post-war investigations actually describe Ilsa as she ordered beatings and torture on prisoners, mainly for her own amusement. She'd walk through the camps naked or on horseback, and she'd select prisoners for punishment. And she'd have these prisoners murdered for their tattoos or unusual skin patterns. Now, one of the most disturbing things, this is debated though, so not 100% that this happened, but one of the things that they say is her legacy. So one of the allegations against her is that she had lampshades, gloves, and book covers made from human skin. And they noted, like, especially if the skin had like tattoos or some sort of like weird formation, something on there, but this would be of murdered inmates. Now, again, these were allegations. It looks like there's not a whole lot that tells whether this is perfectly true or not. But during the Buchenwald trials in 1947, these claims started getting international attention. So this is what she was going for. Now, post-war investigations found that while tattooed human skin was found at Buchenwald, the proof really showed that it was kept mainly for different testing and such. However, what was well documented about Ilsa was her participation in the sadistic culture at camp was very well documented, and it was there was truth behind it. Now, in the trials and imprisonment in 1947, there was U.S. military tribunals and and she was convicted of war crimes, and then she was sentenced to life in prison. But that was later reduced to 4 years due to lack of definitive evidence. And then there was public outrage over her getting out so quickly. So in 1949, West Germany did a retrial. She was rearrested by German authorities then, and they found her guilty of murder, incitement to murder, and cruelty. And then again, she was sentenced to life in prison at that point, and that one stuck. And then again, she ended up hanging herself in her cell in 1967. Okay, so legacy and symbolism. Ilsa became a symbol of sadism and moral corruption under totalitarian power. She was known as a demonic feminine archetype in the Nazi mythos. Media often portrayed her as the embodiment of female cruelty and the dangers of unchecked authority and dehumanization. She remains one of the most infamous female perpetrators of the Holocaust through aspects of her story and have become mixed with post-war propaganda and myth-making. Again, I ended up looking into her last name. Her maiden name was Kohler. It was spelled different than the Kohler company with the bathroom fixtures and plumbing and such. So I don't really know that there's any sort of relation there. Not that it mattered. I just like to find those ties sometimes. But what I will note is she did start kind of from humble backgrounds, and she was a clerk, and then she worked her way all up. She rose all the way up to this first lady of Buchenwald. And she was born in Dresden, which was in a lower middle class family. She was educated. She was literate at the time, and she worked as a bookkeeper. So very, very ordinary beginnings. And then in 1932, she joined the Nazi Party. At the time, this was when membership was still selective. This made her an early believer and not one that joined after the rise of Hitler. She ended up meeting Karl Otto Koch, which she married in 1936 then. And through him, she entered the Nazi Party's inner domestic world. And this was like an elite circle in the concentration camp commandments. So the SS in Nazi Germany stood for Schutzstaffel, which was the German word meaning protection squadron or defense corps. At Buchenwald between 1937 and 1941, she became known as Die Hexe von Buchenwald, or the Witch of Buchenwald. Her role at the camp was not just a commandant's wife. So I think what's interesting is if I consider if anything happened in the United States, women were given so little power that I wonder, is this the difference between this, women in Germany at the time and what we knew women in the United States to be? So I did dig a little deeper into all of that. And although not officially part of the SS command hierarchy, Ilsa functioned as an unofficial enforcer and participant in Camp Terror. Survivors and witnesses who testified noted that she selected prisoners for punishment based on their appearances, especially their tattoos. She would order the beatings or executions for disobedience, but then basically that disobedience would maybe just be like she didn't like the way somebody looked and she would order them to death. And she would often present at public whippings or executions, and she would laugh and give commands. And she wasn't just a bystander, she was part of this cruel culture that was defined by the Buchenwald concentration camp. Her house was near the camp perimeter, and it became this symbol of obscene luxury. She had very fine furniture, she had servants, and she had, like I'll say in quotes, trophies, while tens of thousands of people starved just within sight of her in public area. So what witnesses claimed was that she had prisoners with tattoos of interest marked for death, like I said, and then she preserved their skin. And this is what kind of tied it to the Ed Gein story. Apparently he had read about this, and this would have been the propaganda that was sent out. And him and his friend were looking at. But the human skin was allegedly used for lampshades, gloves, or book covers in her home, like I said. And she collected body parts such as shrunken heads, which were found at Buchenwald. But again, the lampshades, gloves, and book cover parts were not ever really proven. Now, during the liberation, the U.S. troops did find tattooed human skins at Buchenwald pathology labs, and the forensic analysis suggested that it may have been just used for like medical and anatomical kind of study, not for her personal trophy. So there's no proof, but it's possible, I guess. And there's no physical evidence conclusively proved Ilsa herself ordered or possessed these lampshades, but still, her behavior, regardless, was absolutely horrendous. It was cruel. And I guess there was definitely a fascination with tattoos that made this feel plausible to many. and they became a potent symbol of Nazi dehumanization. So the trials, when she was arrested by the U.S. forces, so the earlier trials in 1945, and she was tried at Dachau in 1947, she was charged as a participant in a murder of these inmates, selection of prisoner for death based on the tattoos, and embezzlement of camp funds, which she shared with her husband. Now, outcome was she was sentenced to life in prison, which was then reduced to 4 years, like I noted, due to the insufficient physical evidence. However, the public was just outraged and they erupted, wondering how the bitch of Buchenwald could just walk free. So she was rearrested again, 1949, by West German authorities, and she was tried again and convicted of incitement to murder and grievous bodily harm and sentenced to life in prison. The psychology behind it is interesting. Historians and psychologists have tried to understand why Ilsa would have become who she was. She wasn't uneducated. She wasn't known mentally ill by a clinical sense. Her behavior actually reflects a psychological transformation under absolute power. So they called it sadistic narcissism, which is deriving pleasure from suffering of others as proof of superiority. Displacement, so channeling personal insecurities. She reportedly feared aging, which interestingly to me ties to that whole Hollywood thing of women were rejected when they were aging. So I kind of found that pretty interesting and found that parallel. But also that she did this domination to these prisoners who she felt were inferior to her. And then also dehumanization, living daily beside suffering, normalizing it, and she stopped seeing inmates as human then. She embodied what was later called the banality of evil, cruel that emerges not from psychosis, but from conformity, rather, and indulgence within this immoral system. So, beyond the monster myth, what was real? Over time, Ilsa Koch became a mythic figure used in media and propaganda to symbolize Nazi female depravity. Some historians now argue she became a scapegoat, absorbing public outrage that could not be directed at all who were complicit in it. And that may be very true, but again, some of the stuff she does, it sounds like this was a deserving sentence then. But that said, like I said, the survivor accounts are consistent about a few things, and that's that she was a participant, not a bystander. She encouraged and enjoyed the cruelty, and she benefited directly from the system of murder and forced labor. So on her end, Ilsa spent nearly 2 decades in prison after her second conviction. She maintained her innocence, but was despised by guards and inmates alike. So in 1967, she was found hanged in her cell, Aka Koch women's prison. She was 60 years old, and she left behind a note. It was brief, it was confused, and not remorseful. So Nazi era Germany treated film and radio as full spectrum psychological tools. And so I kind of thought this was a great way to take learning about this person and trying to tie and parallel it to what was going on in the United States at that time. But one of the things that I also wanted to sidebar on is I have often heard about Operation Paperclip. And I was really curious about that. And since we were talking about Nazi Germany and propaganda and everything in this episode, what I wanted to do is kind of dive into what I could find in Operation Paperclip. And this overlap of wartime secrecy, rocket science, and Cold War politics created this kind of whole ground of like people say that it was basically the Nazis turned NASA for us in the United States. The U.S. program brought more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians to the United States between 1945 and 1959 to work for American military and scientific projects. The U.S. wanted German expertise in rocketry, aeronautics, chemistry, and medicine, and to keep that talent from the Soviet during early Cold War competition, is the claim. The real impact on the U.S. space program. Scientists recruited through this program, including prominent rocket engineers, contributed to U.S. advances in rocketry and were part of the talent base that later fed into America's space efforts and the creation of NASA. So, who are the famous figures? Oof. Well, here's one you'll know the name Werner von Braun. He was a leading German rocket scientist who had worked on the V 2 rockets And after relocation, he became a central figure in the U.S. rocketry and later prominent technical leader and associate of NASA's rocket program. Hundreds of technical specialists were also moved to U.S. military labs and later some worked on missiles, test range propulsions, and later on space launch technology that NASA used or inherited. So what I'll call in quotes the conspiracy claim to the theory is Nazis, Hitler included, were secretly moved to U.S. and formed NASA. So I don't know what's true and what's not or what's ever being covered, but I do just think I will speak to these as we'll call in quotes conspiracies because there's still stuff out there that people make these claims and I don't know what the truth is, but I like to speak on it just to kind of throw it out there and let you think critically on your own and you do your own research and figure it out. But Operation Paperclip and German rocket scientists working in the U.S. with leaps implying organized continuity from Nazi leadership and institutions directly into NASA, or that NASA is a Nazi created control by these people. So the part of the claims that are notably true is the U.S. recruited many of these German scientists after World War II, and those individuals contributed substantially to American rocketry and technology programs that eventually supported the NASA mission. Now, what they claim is conspiracy or false or heavy misleading is that NASA was not formed by the Nazis, and NASA was established by the U.S. Congress and Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1958, that was the president at the time, as a civilian agency in response to this Soviet Sputnik launch. It was created through American political, military, and scientific institutions, not as a direct continuation of Nazi institutions. So let's see. Hitler and top Nazi leaderships were not relocated to the U.S. to run anything, is what the claim is. But the real uncomfortable facts are that recruiting scientists who had Nazi affiliation is morally complicated, that moral ambiguity makes tidy conspiracy narratives attractive, and Cold War secrecy, classified projects, rapid personal moves, and the secrecy of early rocket work created gaps that are easy to sensationalize. People compress complex institutional histories into a single villainous origin story. So the Nazis created U.S. scientists, which created NASA. Um, Again, I don't know what the truth is. I think both are possible. I don't really have a huge opinion on it. I'm more in the middle of, I just like to hear the theories and I'm going to share the theories. So all I'm claiming them to be theories. So from that aside, it also took me into propaganda. What was Germany doing at the time? Were they using, film as weapons too? Because we do know in the United States, they were also propagating everybody. And I will definitely go over that. But total control. So in 1933, soon after taking power, the Nazis brought the entire film industry under the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, led by Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels was the Minister of Propaganda for Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler. He was one of Hitler's closest and most loyal associates, known for his skill in manipulating public opinion through mass media, radio, film, and speeches. So Goebbels' role, he controlled nearly all communication in Nazi Germany. Newspapers, film, art, theater, radio. He was the master of propaganda. He was crafting powerful messages to glorify Hitler, spreading anti-Semitic ideals, and to justify the war. And again, as we know, war makes money. War makes money here and there. He helped shape the image of Hitler as a godlike leader and spread the myth of Aryan superiority. During World War II and final days, as Germany began losing the war, Goebbels remained fiercely loyal to Hitler. When Hitler died by suicide in Berlin bunker in April 30th, 1945, Goebbels became Chancellor of Germany for just one day. The next day, May 1st, 1945, the claim is Goebbels and his wife killed their 6 children with cyanide and then took their own lives to avoid capture by the Soviets. Now, the legacy of Goebbels is remembered as one of history's most dangerous propagandists, a man who weaponized words and imagery to manipulate millions and fuel genocide. His use of mass communication laid the foundation for modern psychology and media propaganda techniques. Every script, casting choice, and distribution decision required approval. The goal was to fuse art, entertainment, and politics so seamlessly that viewers absorbed the ideology as story and so there were two film types. One was just open propaganda. It was overtly political. Der Ewige Jude, 1940, anti-Semitic pseudo-documentary comparing Jews to vermin and framed genocide as self-defense. The other type of film would be covert or soft propaganda, which was escapist stories that normalize Nazi values. So these would come more through comedies and melodramas where these good Germans embodied loyalty and sacrifice and obedience and this radical purity. And then these historical epics, like 1945, there was one called Kolberg, and that glorified patriotic death over surrender, even as Germany was collapsing. Goebbels' cinematic technique understood this emotional hypnosis. So Reifenstahl used symmetry, mass choreography, and rhythmic editing to create a quasi-religious trance. They used camera angles, elevated the leaders, and diminished individuals visually, encoding hierarchy. The other interesting thing, which I want to get into this next topic in its own kind of, I'm going to get into it in its own episode when we start talking about music, but this is where this started. Music in 440 hertz standard tuning, set officially by the Reich Broadcast Institute, became part of the emotional conditioning. Bright, tense, and triumphal. We'll learn later that this is actually meant to deregulate nervous systems, and but we'll talk about that in a whole other episode. But this is where it started. He used this Hertz tuning system to start using it for emotional conditioning of the masses as well. So on radio, the voice of the Führer, um, Volksgeist, excuse me, Volksgeistmeisterschaft through the airwaves. So Volksempfänger is people receiver, and this regime produced a cheap receiver, which was known as the Volksempfänger. So nearly every home could tune in. These sets were intentionally limited in range. Citizens could only receive government stations, and Hitler and Goebbels' speeches were broadcast live, turning private living rooms into ritual spaces of mass participation. As far as content mix, the news bulletins were rewritten to fit the party line, light entertainment and folk music to keep spirits high and normalize the new order, and then, in quotes, enemy radio listening became a crime, punishable by imprisonment or death in wartime. And this also tied into psychological engineering. Repetition of simple slogans in Volk, in Reich, or in Führer conditioned identity through rhythm and sound. Constant background messaging reduced critical distance, and listeners internalized propaganda as the ambient truth. That's still happening today, guys. It's still happening. So during war, radio served as both seductive and mobilizer, reassurance of victory, then calls for total sacrifice. The underlying strategy of Goebbels, it was to indoctrinate. Emotional truth beats factual truth. Propaganda should appeal to instinct and not intellect. Again, guys, still happening. The audience must feel part of a mythic story. Heroism, threat, purification, all of these emotions are captured, and reason then will follow. People will make some sort of connection, and this approach created what modern psychologists called collective and entrainment. This is shared rhythm, imagery, and emotional synchronizing on an entire nation's nervous system. Guys, this is still happening. So echoes in later media, just even following the wartime, Hollywood and Cold War powers all studied Nazi media methods, which mass rallies to televised spectacles, radios to political broadcasting. The core insight was control emotions, then control the narrative. This remains the template for modern propaganda, marketing, and information today. So the really interesting thing is during this time then, I wanted to shift back to Hollywood and what was going on in the United States at this very time. And Hollywood allied with cinema and recycled propaganda techniques, especially around women. And since this is really the heartbeat of my podcast, I mean, I do understand I'm going to cover all kinds of things, but right now in my first season here, it's really going strong on women because I am a woman. I am trying to understand how I got to where I was, where, I was melting down and having all these different things happen to me. That where the hell did this all come from? So, after the war, American filmmakers studied Nazi film style for both psychological warfare and artistic inspiration. Riefenstahl's triumph of will impressed even her enemies. Her lighting, symmetry, and camera choreography became a visual grammar for power and desire. US and British studios also adapted this grammar for persuasion with polish, from patriotic newsreels to consumer advertising. The shift, the same tools, mass emotion, idealized beauty, submission to an image. It's just a new ideology: freedom, prosperity, femininity. Shifting forward a little bit in the 1950s, golden age, post-war woman has both symbol and instrument of reconstruction. The camera reproduced propaganda's centralized gaze. So this is something that Hitchcock used. The woman framed, lit, and disciplined as the focus of the mail order. And advertising in Hollywood merged. The housewife and the starlet became a peacetime equivalent of a model citizen, right? Whew. Films like Rear Window and Vertigo by Hitchcock, and then also 7 Year Itch, I'm not sure who the director was, but Marilyn Monroe was in that, turned that gaze into plot, showing men attempting to control, remake, or surveil women who embodied both temptation and threat. So, like I said, Hitchcock used this, and this fetishistic framing echoes Riefenstahl's uh, pageantry of women as icons in motion, and it was very choreographed and mythic. So, Cold War psychological warfare, government and studios worked hand in hand. The U.S. Information Agency used documentaries and Hollywood exports as soft power, countering Soviet realism with glamour and consumer freedom. Television commercials borrowed Goebbels' rhythm, short, repetitive slogans, and emotional music to build identity through consumption. Consume her, consumer, guys. Female figures, housewives, pinups, actresses became symbols of ideological superiority, proof that capitalism produced beauty and comfort, not rationing and toil. Now, going back a little, 1930s to 40s. So we'll touch back with Shirley Temple, who served as a domestic morale machine. Her image reassured this Depression era and wartime audience that purity and optimism still existed. Behind the scenes, though, these studios were still controlling her persona, wardrobe, smile, behavior, and how Hollywood manufactured this acceptable femininity of women then, not just Shirley Temple, but any of the actresses and starlets. Post-war, that formula matured into the 1950s ideal woman. So it's cheerful, contained, and patriotic. So a little bit of side by side with the Nazi propaganda and the post-war Hollywood. Nazis would use monumental symmetries to crowds and rallies, where post-war Hollywood would use a geometric staging of perfect domestic sets. So this perfect home. The Nazis, their propaganda would use this elevated camera to do this authoritative sort of focus, where post-war Hollywood started using this male gaze directorial theme, where it was, just looking in at this woman, as an object. Now, Nazis would use it as ritual and obedience, where post-war Hollywood was glamour and consumption. So they were trying to get people to buy things still. Nazis would use uniforms and choreography, where post-war Hollywood was fashion and star system. Nazis would use emotional transfer ideology. Post-war Hollywood used emotional transfer identity and sales. Both rely on rhythm, repetition, beauty, and awe to bypass reason and implant desire or loyalty. Now, the psychological continuum. Riefenstahl, Hitchcock, each refined the art as conditioning through aesthetics. All relied on the same neural route: imagery, emotion, belief, then behavior. Now, modern echoes, music videos, fashion photography, and political stagecraft still use those visual hierarchies. Yeah, it absolutely does. The, in quotes, perfect influencer imagery is curated, lit, obedient, and algorithm ideals, and it extends the same lineage of controlled femininity. That's brilliant contrast, and narratively, it's gold, right? Juxtaposing Ilsa, the monster woman of Nazi Germany, the American woman of the 1940s and 50s, who were being idealized, were domesticated and sanitized through Hollywood and propaganda, and exposes the deep psychological split on how femininity was weaponized on both sides of the war, right? So totally different, but still same somehow. So some of the layers of how they were using this were using them symbolically and functioning. So the symbol in Nazi would be like this witch, this dominatrix. They were a deviant, where the United States was, they wanted their women to be angelic and housewives and star-like. And the function would be embodying the corruption of feminine power. Ilsa was an awful human, where in the United States they're trying to show our women are contained and obedient. Nazis' message was more uncontrolled women are dangerous, where United States are saying, controlled women, they sustain order. And Nazis would use harsh light, uniforms, and authority, where the United States started working more with a soft lighting, a domestic glow, and it showed more of a submissive woman. And the emotional tone of the Nazi Germany films were more fear, disgust, and fascination, where the post-war woman in the US was being shown as a desire, a comfort, and a reassurance. These are both extremes of severe patriarchy. One demonizes female agency and the other one simply fucking domesticates it. Yeah. So post-war America's counter myth. After the trauma of World War II and the spectacle of the female brutality, such as Ilsa or Irma Grease, she was another Nazi guard that was apparently fucking awful. Western media redefined womanhood through this contrast, right? So as I just described, so no more witches of Reich, and no more witches of Buchenwald. Instead, our wives are devoted and they're gentle and they're smiling and they're perfectly curated. And the films and ads and public messaging made purity and domestication not just moral ideals, but political ones. Proof of cultural superiority. The United States is better because our women are beautiful and they're sweet and they're soft and they're not crazy and unhinged. Look how civilized we are. Look how moral we are. Even our women are nurturing, safe, and controlled. Not saying Ilsa was okay. She wasn't. But I'm just saying it was one extreme to the fucking other. Ilsa became a collective dumping ground for the world's fear of female power turned perverse. She wasn't just a war criminal, which she was. She was framed as the embodiment of everything unnatural about female autonomy. Don't let those bitches free. They'll go fucking crazy and they'll ruin your life and your world, right? That's what they're getting at. But in turn, the United States were going to have their women just go ahead and be controlled and shut the fuck up. So Ilsa's sexualized portrayal in post-war tabloids and film exaggerated her cruelty through gender. She was punished not only for the violence, but for being a woman who desired power. What a fucking bitch. Again, not discounting her bitchness, because she fucking was, but given that they were using this whole entire thing as a propaganda tool to kind of navigate gender is what I'm raising right now. So the contrast that is with the 1950s wife punished those socially for desiring anything but being complicit. Now, the media mirrors with all of this, with Ilsa's image circulated as this grotesque female, while Hollywood was simultaneously mass producing the perfect feminine. So like Shirley Temple would be this perfect childlike innocence and obedience, where the older stars like Doris Day, Grace Kelly, the June Cleavers were chaste and they were demure and they were patriotic, and that was womanhood, right? You be that little housewife and you look good doing it. That's perfection, right? Then going forward with Hitchcock's heroines, when women did seek independence or curiosity, like in Psycho or Vertigo, they were punished or fucking killed. Punish them bitches for being themselves. Both worlds showed male-directed narratives disciplining female identity through fear, right? Ilsa, she was punished by history. American women were rewarded for submission. So again, same axis, different ends. The psychological and symbolic analysis of this is Ilsa represented the shadow feminine, the raw destructive potential when their irrational emotions got too fucking out of hand and they weren't socially fucking contained, right? The American housewife, on the other hand, represented this suppressed feminine, and the emotional will be perfectly contained. And, which one do you want? What it represents, repressed in one culture, erupted in another, really. While the U.S. exported idealized femininity through film and advertising, the European post-war psyche projected its guilt onto monsters like Ilsa Koch. Together, they created a global myth. Women in their devil or angel never integrated into human beings. Now, some historical roots with the films. The OSS, these were spy films in World War II. Before the CIA existed, the OSS enlisted Hollywood talent like John Ford and Disney effects artists, such as his name was Bob Broughton, I believe, to make training films and morale boosting documentaries. So, OSS in 1946, Paramount's dramatization of wartime espionage was written and produced by a former OSS officer with the intent of celebrating the agency's heroics. So, there's a pattern of influence over this. Script vetting and edits. Researchers like Tricia Jenkins have documented that since the CIA opened its official entertainment liaison office in the 1990s, it has reviewed and sometimes altered scripts to avoid negative portrayals. Cold War propaganda, CIA-backed adaptations of works of George Orwell and Graham Greene, and they were altered to fit pro-US narratives without audiences knowing that the agency was actually involved in this. And the goal was, according to the former CIA entertainment liaison, Hollywood is the only way the public learns about the agency, making film and TV a strategic tool for image management. So here's a little timeline of a confirmed CIA Hollywood collaborations and propaganda influence spanning from World War II to the present. These examples are drawn from declassified documents, academic research, and investigative journalism. So from the 40s to 50s, the OSS origins and Cold War messaging, World War II OSS films, the CIA predecessor, the Office of Strategic Services, recruited filmmakers like John Ford and Disney, like I said, to produce these training and morale films. So in 1954, the CIA secretly funded the animated adaptation of George Orwell's novel Animal Farm, altering the ending to be more anti-communist. In 1958, the CIA-backed version of Graham Greene's novel reversed its anti-American message to portray U.S. intervention in Vietnam as heroic in The Quiet American. The image and management of cultural warfare was done in films. CIA covertly supported literary magazines, art exhibitions, and film festivals to promote Western values and counter Soviet influence. Interestingly, guys, 1986 Top Gun, though this was not directly CIA, the Pentagon worked closely with producers to boost military recruitment. The CIA later adopted similar liaison strategies. In 1996, the CIA created an entertainment liaison office to manage its image in film and TV. This allowed the agency to vet scripts and influence portrayals of their offices. So, moving forward, counterterrorism of the 2000s and 2010s. In The Recruit 2003, the CIA consulted on this film to portray recruitment and training in its favorable light. Alias from, I believe that was a show from 2001 to 2006, the CIA partnered with ABC to promote the show and even used it as a recruitment tool. This is still going on, guys, and these are just a few. But Jack Ryan, this was an Amazon series. CIA Liaison Office confirmed involvement in shaping the shadow depiction of intelligence work. And interestingly, the CIA is on TikTok and Instagram, so the agency now uses social media to shape its public image, often using pop culture references and humor. So keep your fucking eyes peeled. So key themes across these decades is the CIA has reviewed and influenced script, and they have did script vetting to avoid negative portrayals. They used it as recruitment tools, and films and shows have been used to attract new hires and normalize surveillance culture. And they've used it also for narrative control. The agency has shaped stories to justify controversial operations, from the coups to the tortures. So interestingly, I want to backtrack before I end this episode to one more thing, because I do recall in high school and college, we learned about, during wartime, Rosie the Riveter. Ladies, buckle up for this one, because I'm going to give you a little bit of background on this. So, if many of you remember Rosie the Riveter, we know that's propaganda, and that was very, very blatant. The purpose of it was these whole "we can do it." If you remember the posters, these "we can do it." 1942, A. Howard Miller and Norman Rockwell later did Rosie in 1943, were designed to convince women, especially the middle-class housewives, to join the workforce as patriotic duty. Now, this part we know, right? Now, the character was partially based on real women workers, but she was mostly a fictional composite used to sell the idea of women in factories. So it was to get women to go fucking work the factories, right? Like, oh, all the men are at war. We need people to work. Fucking guys, I think this is where they start ripping women from their kids. This is why we're putting our fucking kids in daycare. This is why we're no longer getting to be the nurturing fucking mothers that we're supposed to freaking be. Now, here's the thing that I always find interesting. This is also fucking culture and conditioning. Because even while women were being urged to go into work and do men's work, because obviously they're saying your man's away. We need people to keep this stuff moving. We need you to get this shit made so we can send it out for our men to win this war. The government and the advertisers wanted to reassure the public that women wouldn't lose their femininity. That's why these fucking posters and films and ads often show women with perfect hair, perfectly manicured fucking nails, and lipstick, and they're all done up while welding and fucking riveting. The message was, yes, you can work like a man, but you don't have to stop looking like a beautiful woman. And this is a way of controlling gender roles still, ensuring women that they were still seen as attractive and domestic, and this was just temporary, right? The reality of this is these women were working on a fucking factory floor. Many women just tied their hair back. They wore overalls. They were getting fucking dirty. Factory work is dirty, right? But the image was smoothed over. That the reality, to make this idea more palatable, is you can still be beautiful in your industrial job. So today, Rosie has been reclaimed as this symbol of empowerment, but not because of her origin of intent or her original intent, but because women and later feminist movements reinterpreted her as proof that women can work hard and they can do skilled labor and they did deserve equality. That part I love, but the irony is this propaganda really was bullshit, and it was meant to keep women in their fucking places while they had to go do the fucking work. And in short, Rosie was propaganda. But the lipstick and the curls and that whole part was a fucking cultural compromise, a way to say you can rivet, but don't you dare stop being pretty. And if you peel back the glossy paint on Rosie and her sister propaganda, so there's more, the deeper that you go, it gets more and more surreal, right? So beauty is a patriotic duty. So these wartime ads told women that lipstick was a weapon of morale. One of 1940's beauty manual declared, a woman's lipstick is an instrument of personal morale that helps conceal heartbreak and sorrow. And factories even set up on-site beauty counters in salons so women could keep up their appearances during these long fucking shifts in the fucking factories. And the message was, you can rivet, but don't forget your rouge. And nail length was policed too. Short nails were meant that you were a serious worker, but manicures were still encouraged to show that you hadn't let yourself go. The U.S. government actually created a cartoon character named Jenny on the job who appeared on these posters reminding women to go get your beauty sleep and keep your hair neat under your cap and stay clean and attractive while working your long hours. And these posters were just propaganda teaching women that grooming was as much of a duty as her riveting to get her job done too. Also, let me point out these women were going home and fucking raising families. One of the wartime posters that captured the bizarre mix of patriotism and beauty culture, it was a double bind. Women were told work like a man but look like a pinup model. And the contradiction was intentional. It was reassured that women weren't becoming too masculine, and it set the stage for this post-war pushback into domestication. So in 1946, ads pivoted to shame women back into their housewife roles. Beauty standards woven into the image were a form of gender control disguised as patriotism. And the fact that we've reclaimed her as a feminist icon today is actual cultural judo. It's flipping the original intent right on its head. So that is all I have for today, guys. I think this was a pretty long episode, but I hope you found it interesting. I hope it gave you some things to really think critically on, and I hope you found it fascinating. I have some movie deep dives coming up, some collaborations that I'm working on, but in the meantime, I'm going to continue to talk about these different things that come up in my head, just until I can make time to record with the people that I want to record with. And there are going to be a couple episodes that are going to be different formats and whatnot coming up. So I'm really excited for this. I'm so excited about the podcast, guys. I hope you all enjoy it. And if you have anything that you know, or if I gotten anything wrong, I'm not a defensive person. I love when people share facts, or even if you just have an alternative thought process on things, please by all means share some comments and also share the podcast. Thank you guys. Hope to see you next time.